Good afternoon. I want to welcome these leaders for coming in to have this very important discussion about some of the most pressing issues of our time. I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit. And
I am Matt Odegaard, and I'm wearing men's clothes because, well, I'm a man. Sure, this is apparently a clip for disabled people, but really, if you were blind, would you want someone describing their clothes to you that you still can't see? Seems rather patronizing to me, but that's just my opinion. Also on today's show, we look at 75 plus attacks on pregnancy centers and churches, etc. since the leaked opinion on the overturning of Roe, which ended up happening. Disney, of course, is at it again with their quote-unquote kids content. Canadian pastor finally has charges dropped for holding church meetings. We'll revisit a story that we talked about months and months ago. And finally, a celebrity Goth person is purging some of her occult witchcraft content. And this is actually really a good sign. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public. I am Matt Odegaard, your host here today, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Your time is valuable, and I want to honor that. If you haven't already, hit the like button, the subscribe button. If this is interesting at all, give it a review, maybe even a 5-star review. That's up to you. I appreciate it anyway. If you're just listening on audio, I really appreciate you. If you want to see any of the accompanying media like videos or pictures, you can always navigate over to churchpublic.com/podcast to get the video version of this. I'm not saying it's better. It's just different and extra because a picture's worth 1,000 words or something like that. At any rate, I really appreciate you being part of this channel. I'm trying to help inform you what it means, what it looks like to view this world, to live in this world as a believer. And if you're not even there yet, who Jesus is and why we should follow him, why that is what I would say the best way, really the only way. As he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. But anyway, we're going to look at current events from a Christian perspective and try to make sense of them so that we can go out and live in this world and not become like it. Because this culture wants you. This culture wants you to follow the culture, what they say, what they want, with every way that they possibly can. They're coming after you. We're going to actually look at that at the verse of the day and a little bit from our good friend Paul in his letter to the Ephesians. We're going to look at why this culture continues to come after you. They want you. And so we want to fight against that. We want to push back against that. We want to say, no, I don't want to be like this culture. I don't want to be part of this culture. I want to be different than that. So let's look at a couple of the news stories and see where that leaves us. All right. So today we've got a bunch of things going on, and we're going to start with Disney because Disney is just at it again, and I don't know what to tell you. I'm kind of tired of talking about Disney, but we keep doing that. So according to, where am I getting this? A Christian Post on this particular article, but it actually comes from a conservative media watchdog group called Parents, Television, and Media Council. And this particular group noticed that some changes happened to Disney Plus. If you haven't canceled Disney Plus already, anyway, it's hard. It's hard because, you know, we want to have entertainment, we want to have good entertainment, but Disney does not particularly have our best interest in mind, of course. So as we're going to notice here, what they did is they went back on a promise that they gave. Of course, they can do that because they're a company and they want to make money. But I mean, what are we doing here? Like, which thing are we? Is Disney Plus for children or is Disney Plus for adults? And the problem here is, if you look at it, you think, well, Disney Plus is for kids, and so you set your kid in front of it, and it's fine, and everything's fine. And then maybe you don't realize that last Friday, R-rated movies, and particularly like pretty, I'm going to put this up here. This is Deadpool. So Deadpool, a very R-rated movie and a very trashy movie indeed, was posted, as well as, let's see, Deadpool 2, and I think a couple others. It doesn't really matter what those titles are necessarily, but it's just so you know that these titles are on the site and available for anybody who's on the site to hit go on. And you just need to know these are not appropriate movies for kids. They may not even be appropriate for adults at that point, but they're definitely not appropriate for kids, and we need to watch out for this. But the other side of the story is Parents, Television, and Media Council in 2019, they reported that The blog What is on Disney Plus reported Disney Plus would only include content with ratings of PG-13 or softer, and that most adult-oriented content the Walt Disney Company acquired from its purchase of 20th Century Fox would be distributed on its other streaming platform, Hulu. So, according to their own plan, they weren't supposed to put this R-rated and very R-rated stuff on their Disney Plus, but instead make it available on Hulu, which obviously they've gone back against. The PTC president, Tim Winter, recalled 3 years ago, the Walt Disney Company made a promise to families, no R-rated movies on Disney Plus, they said. It's a family-focused platform. We have Hulu for our edgier adult fare, they said. It turns out they were lying to us. This is continuing on with Tim Winter. He said, after decades of corporate brilliance establishing itself as the world's most trusted brand for families, today's C-level suite at Disney has decided to flush it all down the toilet, end quote. That's what Tim Winter, the president of this organization, points to. Now, Disney apparently points people to its parental controls, but the presence of R-rated, TV, MA-rated content violates the trust and sensibilities of families. Right. That's what I'm trying to help you see. I want you to note that they're putting this stuff out there, and sure, they want you to watch it, but who else do they want to watch it? And that's what we've been talking about previously on Disney Plus, that they have specifically said, as I referred to in a couple of past episodes, which you can get at churchpublic.com, that Disney is, in their own words, adding more LGBTQAAIP++ #$ to everything that they do. They want to queer everything. This is their words, their descriptions of it. You can go back and listen to their own words saying these things. They want to make these characters forefront. They want to have trans characters in animated films, which they said you cannot actually do because you can't tell who's trans. So you have to introduce those characters into the storylines, which we're starting to see. You can go back a couple of weeks and listen to my podcast where I talked about Baymax. And Baymax encounters a character who clearly is trans, and the only way you know that is they look like a man, but they're in an aisle filled with feminine products, giving opinions on feminine products, which, of course, men don't use because men. Anyway, continuing on in this, there are other things. We talked about Turning Red movie, which is, I would say, not appropriate for children. Again, talking about feminine issues in an animated form, which is just, I would say, not what you want your kids to learn about the birds and the bees in, but this is my opinion. Again, let's see, there was a couple other things. The Proud Family introduces same-sex parents as characters. The 2020 short film Out included a gay main character. The reboot of The Proud Family introduces LGBTQ ideology to children. We talked about Lightyear previously, where there is a lesbian kiss at the end of the movie that was deleted and then re-included in opposition to Florida saying you can't talk about your sexual agenda to kindergarten through third graders. So that's pretty much all that I want to talk about Disney right now, but I mean, you get the idea. Make sure you know what your kids are watching. I would say this is going to take time, effort, energy. Pre-screen everything your kids watch, if possible, because you never know what any of these companies, I know I'm picking on Disney here, but all of these companies are doing these things. As I talked about, I think it was a Discovery Plus clip that I showed before where there are two male T-Rex dinosaur buddies who want to have an egg, but they can't have eggs because they're two males, so they have a stone as a fake egg, and then the children in this animated show, this is a real animated show, it's on Discovery Plus. The children in this show then adopt an egg for the two male T-Rex trans gay characters. I can't even at this point. Anyway, that you just have to watch. Pay attention. Know what your kids are watching. Help them watch the right things that teach them the right values. That's all I'm getting to. All right, let's move on from Disney because I'm over it. All right, so we're looking at all of these pregnancy centers, and if you missed this, because this really is underreported. I've talked about it a bunch. Some other sites have talked about it, but I really haven't seen it in a lot of places. That there are a lot. I even got pushback. I posted a couple of these, and someone said this is disinformation. This isn't really happening. So just in case you don't believe me or your lying eyes, I'm going to give you a picture. So if you're listening on audio, you may want to navigate to this picture. If not, do whatever you want, believe it or not. But this is a picture of just one of the centers that says, if abortion isn't safe, neither are you. Fake blood all over, painted on this place. Windows smashed out. This blood is on you. It says, in other words, you're killing people by not letting them kill babies. That's the message that this organization is sending. Many of these have been specifically claimed by the organization Jane's Revenge, though not all, so we can't attribute all of them to. So there's some alleging there. But what we want to talk about today is that apparently in this organization that's keeping track, there have been 76 attacks on churches and pregnancy centers so far. That has been counted by the Catholic News Agency. So thanks to the Catholic News Agency for counting that. This was since that first initial leaked draft came out about the Mississippi versus Dobbs case that then came out a few weeks later and did overturn Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which returned the rule of abortion to the states, and certain states are for it, certain states are against it. We've talked all about this, but these organizations and apparently random people have been attacking, vandalizing, firebombing different places like churches and pregnancy centers. Again, just saying, pregnancy centers generally have free services, if not really inexpensive, and they help moms, they help infants, they help provide all kinds of free materials to moms like infant clothes and diapers, sometimes even baby strollers and bassinet, all kinds of things, right? They provide all of these kinds of things, but apparently that is bad. And you even have Elizabeth Warren, who I mentioned earlier, and you can go and watch that clip on a previous episode where she said we have to close these pregnancy centers because they are dangerous to women and babies, apparently. The whole why of that, still out to lunch on, I'm not sure, but she is very against these pregnancy centers. At any rate, all of this ginned up anger has led to the vandalism and sometimes destruction of all of these places. I'll just read a couple of these. According to the Catholic News Agency, 76 attacks and counting since early May when someone leaked a draft ruling of the Dobbs v. Jackson women's health ruling, which then eventually did overturn Roe v. Wade and allowed states to protect unborn babies from abortion again. The crimes include arson, theft, vulgar graffiti, property damage, and threats. To date, 39 pregnancy centers have been targeted, 27 churches, a maternity home, 3 political organizations, billboards, a political figure, and a memorial, according to this report. And this only includes attacks with a clear pro-abortion motive. Numerous other vandalism, arson, attacks against Catholic churches and other organizations have taken place, but with less obvious motives. Some of the attacks are graffiti incidents saying if abortions aren't safe, neither are you. That's the picture that I showed. I think I can pull that up for you again. If abortions aren't safe, neither are you. Here's one such incident. And I actually collected several of these, but I'll show you just this one for now. You can look these up. There are plenty of them. And it appears that occurred first at a pro-life pregnancy center in Wisconsin in early May. There has been an FBI investigation, but to date, there have been very few, if not any, that's none, no arrests on people for these events. Is that strange? That seems strange to me. Like, this seems like an act of vandalism. It seems like something that you would want to get to the bottom of. It seems like something that literally is kind of putting people's lives in danger, as opposed to the random graffiti that is, talking about putting women's and babies' lives in danger by saving babies' lives. But anyway, it seems like this should be a problem. The Democrats earlier, about a week ago, blocked a resolution to condemn the pro-abortion violence. In early July, a Democrat state lawmaker praised the vandalism of a pro-life billboard. So hear that. A Democrat lawmaker praised the vandalism of a pro-life billboard in Washington state, according to 770 KTTH. Violence, and this is coming from the article, violence and hostility have been directed at the conservative Supreme Court justices and families. As I've mentioned before, Brett Kavanaugh had a person in front of his house with the intent, allegedly, the perpetrator said, to kill him and potentially others we don't really know. Unfortunately, that was thwarted and he gave himself up. But there's been a lot of ire and anger towards people who just want to save babies and help mothers. The CNA goes on to say, without strong action by federal authorities, many fear the attacks will continue. I would agree with that. In June, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security issued a report warning of continued domestic violence directed at churches, faith-based pro-life organizations, judges, and lawmakers in response to this abortion ruling. And yet, the Democrats don't want to put any additional protections in. So that is a story that is sad and sadly not surprising. Okay, let's move on to perhaps better news. I think this is better news. Because I feel like I always give bad news, and I don't like bad news. Let's give good news. So here's some good news. This is a pastor whom we have talked about. Unfortunately, the picture that I pulled here in terms of good news, this is actually the bad news part, but it gets to the good news. This is the picture of Pastor Arthur Pavlovsky, who I talked about many months ago now in Canada, who was arrested. This is actually the picture of his arrest, so I probably should have pulled a different picture, but this is the picture of when he was arrested for holding church services in Canada when they said you are not allowed to hold church services, at the same time as keeping the big box home stores open, the big box food stores open, strip clubs open, lots of other places stayed open, but church was bad. You cannot go to church. And if you go to church, apparently, as we noted from Pastor Pavlovsky, you get arrested. So he was arrested for the crime of keeping his church open in a dangerous pandemic where keeping churches open would definitely kill people, even though it didn't, but it definitely would have if it would have, but it didn't. So anyway, he was arrested. The good news here is that, and this is according to, Christian Post. Canadian court has ruled in favor of a pastor who gained international notoriety for his steadfast objection to coronavirus restrictions and sought to have a lower court ruling holding him in contempt dismissed. Sarah Miller, the lawyer for Pastor Pavlovsky of Street Church and the Cave of Adulam in Calgary, announced that the Court of Appeal made a unanimous, sound decision overturning the finding of contempt against my client. So he was ruled not guilty in this instance. It was a unanimous ruling from a 3-judge panel, vacated a lower court decision holding him and his brother in contempt for holding an illegal public gathering in violation of Alberta's provincial restrictions on large gatherings imposed during the coronavirus pandemic. He also was proposed to pay I don't remember how much. I'm trying to see. Looks like $15,733 and 59 cents for his crimes. The crime was having church service. So the decision to declare the finding of contempt and sanction order are set aside. The fines that have been paid to them are to be reimbursed. This is fantastic news, where the court, I would say, got something right, that it's okay to have church service. And in a larger context, people have their own responsibility. They have their own agency. They should have their own freedom to do what they want. If you feel like you want to stay home for any reason, do it. That's your freedom. If you want to go to church, that should be your freedom. From a more spiritual sense, the church is open to those that want to find God and should be a place to worship. And we humans shouldn't be the ones to say, you don't get to worship because you are not worthy of worship because you are something, fill in the blank, whatever that is. Whether we're talking about racial things, whether we're talking about spiritual things, whether we're talking about health things, we don't get to decide who comes to the throne of God. All are welcome at the throne of God. Jesus invites you to his throne. That's the whole thing. That's the gospel. Now, you're not worthy of that. No one is worthy of that. That's part of the gospel too. That's why we need Jesus, and then Jesus makes a way for us to connect to God. This is the whole thing that we need to continue to say. When the government says, you don't get to go to church because you're unclean, we have to say, well, but I know I'm unclean. That's why I have to go to church. Okay, there may be some circumstances, limited as they are, where we say, hey, it's better to stay home. But you should make that decision, not the government for you. And that's where we get into this really weird situation that we were in. So this is a great example of the government making what I would say and others would say, and apparently the government court would say, the wrong decision in this case, and then coming back around and making it right. So that's good. Pavlovsky said after lamenting he had lost hope in the justice system, maybe rightly so, he did express gratitude that, quote, finally something positive, something good is happening. He said, this is great news and not just for us. I would agree with that. Not just for us. This is a great example, and hopefully not the last of the examples where actual justice is promoted, not justice for one and a different justice for another, which is something that we talk about as well. All right, let's move on I'll give you one final story here because I think this is another good news story. This is about Kat Von D, who is she is a tattoo artist, celebrity. I'm trying to remember what the show was called. It's not in this article, but it was something like LA Inc. I think it was. But then she left LA Inc. and went to another one. Anyway, all that doesn't really add to the story, but she's a celebrity and a tattoo artist, and her look is that of a very gothic person. I mean, you can imagine, right? The classic black hair and black everything in very gothic, right? That was her look, that was her style, and apparently that was her lifestyle as well in terms of tarot, witchcraft, occult practices, and things like that. A few years ago, she ended up having a baby and in some sense starting a family. Now, I think this is an interesting statement or an interesting phenomenon that happens to people. And this is the thing that I want to point to. I'm going to tell you what she has chosen. I'll show you her post in a moment. But when people have a family, and this is why I keep coming back to family, I'm going to continuously come back to family. Family is so important. It's important for us. It's important for the world. It's important for society. It's important for community. And it's important that we do it right in community. And what happens more times than not is when we begin to have a family, even if we don't have exactly right beliefs, we start to have more right beliefs because we realize that it's not about us. And once you realize that it's not about you, you start to act differently. You start to believe differently. You start to behave differently. You start to add different choices in that you wouldn't have done in the past. And this is almost universally true. Like it really, really is, because you realize when you're not living selfishly, which this culture tells you is the only way to live, you be you, you choose you, live your truth, do whatever you want that makes you happy, regardless of what anybody else is doing, feeling, experiencing, whatever, because you're the most important person in the universe. And so is everyone else, which causes a problem because we just smash into each other. It literally is like an intersection with no stop signs, no stop lights. Everybody just crashes in and says, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And who's right? I don't know, because we don't have any rules, because you do you and live your truth, because there's no universal truth. You see how this works? Like, this is why it just drives me so crazy when people start down this path. But when you start having a family, it's not just you, and you have maybe a spouse, maybe a child, maybe multiple childs, right? And so all of a sudden you're responsible for more than just you, and your world expands, and you realize, oh, I have to have some rules, not just for me, but for my family, and then for the community, because now I realize that when my child comes into contact with another child or another adult, we need to protect the child. We need to protect everybody else. We need to start having some rules. This is just what happens with people. And so you realize that family is the building block of society, and it is the thing that passes on morals and values. Whether or not you want to agree with that, that's just the reality. It's one of those universal truths like gravity. When you have a family, you pass on values. Whether you want to or not, this is just what happens. It's that thing, that old thing that you say, you're just like your dad, or, you act just like your mom, or whatever. Like, that's true because it is true. That's just what happens. Now, we can push against that and try to live differently if we want to, if that's a thing that's important, but that's just what actually happens in life. So here's the interesting story. Kat Von D, who is very gothic, very dark, has decided that she's moving away from some of her former practices, and practices kind of like occult practices. So here is her tweet. Her tweet says, I don't know if any of you have been going through changes in your lives, but in the past few years, I've come to some pretty meaningful realizations, many of them revolving around the fact that I got a lot of things wrong in my past. That's a very well-composed statement. Back down to that question that we talk about a lot here is, why am I here? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of life? And in some of her other posts that I didn't clip, but you can see she has pictures of her family, and she's very proud of her family, and her family drives some of the things that she is believing and then doing. She says, today, I went through my entire library and threw out books that I just don't align with, that just don't align with who I am and who I want to be. And if you're looking at the picture, some of these are like The Witch's Way, The Treasury of Witchcraft, I can't read all of these titles, but very witchy and occulty things. There's a bunch of packs of tarot cards and Ouija boards and other types of things. And, I would say those are bad. But again, my point here is that it's interesting to me as people begin to have families, get older, realize their own mortality, realize that their life is more than just themselves, a very selfish view, they start living differently. She goes on to say, I've always found beauty in the macabre. Again, the Gothic look, right? But at this point, I just had to ask myself, what is my relationship with this content? And the truth is, this is her talking, writing, I don't want to invite any of these things into our family's lives. See that? See where that is? She's recognizing that the family is about more than individuals, which is absolutely true. She continues on, even if it comes disguised in beautiful covers collecting dust on my shelves. And then she says, this... in no way is this post designed to put anybody down, but if you're into this stuff, because I think we're all on our own journey, and I love everyone, regardless of where they might be at. Right now, it's never been more clear to me that there's a spiritual battle taking place. These are her words. Spiritual battle taking place, and I want to surround myself and my family with love and light. And that's the end of her quote there. So here, this is, it's so good. And she's not there. She's clearly not there. She clearly doesn't quite get it all the way. But I mean, pray for her, and others that are like her. And this is the thing. I've brought you many, many stories about witchcraft, about tarot cards, about the occult practices, the pagan rituals that many, many young people are into right now. But it is almost hopeful when you look at this story as just one indicator, but as an indicator that I am hoping, praying, illustrates a trend that maybe people are starting to realize that facing the darkness, going towards the darkness, filling your life with the darkness is not good. And even though she can't say God and she doesn't probably know Jesus, I don't know where she's coming from spiritually, but she says there's a spiritual battle taking place. This is a great acknowledgement that she actually sees that she's right. There is a spiritual battle taking place, and we need to recognize as believers that we know what that is, and we can even put words to that, and we need to recognize that we are in this as well. In fact, we all are, whether or not we see it, whether or not we realize it, or even want to acknowledge it, there is a spiritual battle taking place, and I think it is encouraging that at least one person who was formerly very dark and very Gothic, under her own admission, is recognizing this, and we need to move towards the light. And we, as believers, can go ahead and acknowledge what that light is. We can put a name to that light of Jesus, and we can put a name to the darkness of the spiritual forces of evil in this world. We can put words to that. And even Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, puts a lot of words to that. I'll read a little of it today, but you should go and read more of it from Ephesians 6. But this is really putting words and putting definitions to what Kat Von D has alluded to and is feeling, I would say probably in her soul, where she realizes that there are spiritual forces, there's a spiritual battle. She doesn't want to subject her family to this. These are her words. Again, I don't know her. All I know is what she posted, but she's headed in the right direction, moving away from all of this occult, really dangerous and dark stuff into more of the light. I hope that she makes it all the way to the light. As we've noted, can't do it on your own. That's part of the gospel, that you need help, and that help is in Jesus. That's really actually the only way. Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one can come but by me. But I hope that she finds that, and I hope that you find that, and your kids find that, and those that are searching find that. So this is just from Paul to the Ephesians and to us, as we understand that there is more going on, and this really is a spiritual battle. This is just starting around verse 12. For we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, cosmic powers over this present darkness. Again, the darkness of this age. He continues and says, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in this evil day, having done all that you can to stand firm. So he gives you this cause, and then goes on to talk about what the spiritual armor is. So if you don't know what the spiritual armor is, I've done a little bit of work on it. You can go back to ChurchPublic. Not a ton of it. I think I did one or maybe two small episodes about it, but you should read Ephesians 6 and learn what the spiritual armor is. Maybe I'll do a recap of that sometime. But it's really important to understand that you have tools to deal with this spiritual reality. It's not a battle of flesh. It's not a battle of blood. You don't need to necessarily go and buy a sword or something like that, but you need to understand what the sword of truth is. You need to understand what the armor of God is and how it actually literally protects you from these spiritual forces through the power of the Spirit and the power of God. So go and read this and go figure all of this out. And then Paul gives you this exhortation, this encouragement too, after you've figured it out, after you know what the armor is, after you've put on the armor however, after you walk in the power of God, to stand firm, because the objections, the criticism, the name calling, the spiritual battle will come against you. It will. If you are standing in the presence of God, if you are standing in the power of God, the spiritual forces will come against you. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to fear it, because God is bigger than all of that. But you have to understand that this is a real thing, and you will experience this if you are walking in the way of God. God talks about this all the time. The picture that I like is just, everybody's at the same level, and then you pop up a little bit higher. If you're the one that pops up a little bit higher, you're the one that's going to get hit. Like, that's just how this works. And so if everybody's going one way, you're pretty safe going with them. It's easy to go with the culture. It's hard to go with God, for the reason that if you go with God, you're going against the culture, you're going against the spiritual warfare, you're going against the rulers, powers, authorities of this present darkness, and the forces of evil in the heavenly places. You're going against all of that. You don't have to worry. You don't have to fear, because you have the power of God, and you can put on the whole armor of God. And Paul and I hope that you do this thing. And if you don't know what any of that means, read Ephesians 6, and think about what this goes. And there's a lot of different commentaries about it. Again, I've talked about it a little bit at ChurchPublic. You can go look at that. Otherwise, there's a lot of commentaries that you can find out what all of those pieces of armor do. And if you message me, I can even send you some stuff. But I want you to understand that this is not a battle of flesh and blood. This is a battle of spiritual forces. It's encouraging for me that some people are starting to see this. It's just a little story, but I hope this is a wave that's starting against the prevalence of witchcraft, occulty, crazy spiritual things. And depending on when you're listening to this, as we're kind of ending the summer and moving on to the Halloweeny times, there's a lot of craziness that happens around Halloween because people open themselves up to this. And I would suggest, not that you can't celebrate Halloween, not that you can't go and get candy, whatever, but know what you're doing and know that this evil and this present age, the evil of this present age, wants you and wants you to follow into these dark places rather than going with the light of Christ. And I would suggest you don't. I would suggest you're very careful about what is going on, especially as we get into this weird holiday where we celebrate death and we celebrate the dark and evil things. Be very careful what you open up your heart, your soul, your spirit, your mind to, because the evil one, the rulers, the powers, the authorities of this present darkness want to exploit that in you and cause you to go down this path. I guarantee they're waiting, and they're so patient because they've been around forever, just waiting for you to enter into this and to open yourself up to this. And what you should do is don't open yourself up to this. If that is all confusing and you don't know how, talk about the armor of God. The armor of God protects your heart and your mind and your soul and your spirit, and you can go through that. The biggest way I'll just give you right now is the Word of God. So go to the Word of God, read it every day, read some part of it, even a small part of it every single day. And if you don't know anything about this armor of God, read Ephesians 6 and read about what Paul says and how we are supposed to guard ourselves in this. And I think it will make a little bit more sense. As always, I really appreciate you tuning in, and I appreciate you being a part of this community. If you have any questions, send me a message on any of the Insta places, the social media places. I'm on all of them at ChurchPublic. And of course, you can go to churchpublic.com for all of the other information there. God bless, and as always, keep the faith.